at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, folks, to the Pencil Pushers Podcast and episode 21, and our very first for what we're calling the tip-top year of creativity and growth 2020. I, of course, am still your humble host, Mike Rosado. And today, we're very thrilled to be sharing our interview with Tara Donovan, one of the few artists who's successfully broken into both traditional and CG animation, working on hand-drawn animated classics like The Thief and the Cobbler and Asterix Conquers the World, to CG animation for blockbusters like Justice League, Aquaman, and the upcoming King Kong vs. Godzilla, something I'm very excited about. We dive into how to break into the animation world, how being insatiably curious will help with growth and employment, and things you can do to remain healthy in an incredibly stressful and sometimes unpredictable industry. Find and follow her online at Tara Animator, that's TARANIMATOR, and just add a .com to check out her site. So now, without further ado, do yourself a favor, ease your seat back, relax, and enjoy our chat with Tara. Awesome. We have the wonderful and lovely and talented Tara Donovan here for the Pencil Pushers Podcast, our first podcast episode of 2020. So you're our first.
Oh, wow. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you. How's it been so far?
So far so good. It's been very action-packed.
Yeah, based on some of the past movies you've been doing, that seems to be sort of like the direction you're sort of like a theme for you, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. So, just to give a little bit of a heads up for the listeners, Tara has been doing animation for 25 years or so, something like that.
Yes.
Right?
Let's say 25 years, probably.
Predominantly starting out as a hand-drawn animator, not 2D as we just talked about, because 2D does sound very limiting, and it's actually kind of apropos because you think about movies like Claws, which is definitely hand-drawn, but definitely not 2D. Mm-hmm. All the way moving to having an amazing, I wouldn't say pivot because you're still doing hand-drawn animation, but definitely transitioning to more of a focus with CG animation.
I mean, I work on a computer. I have been exclusively computer animating for many years, but it's transitioned back and forth between so many different styles and completely flat, 2D animation. I animation directed a 2D show and stuff. So I've had to pop back and forth between 3D and 2D and in many different kinds of software and techniques, from like frame by frame hand drawn to like that more flash style with like joints, like puppeteering kind of thing. And then, what I found is when I went to CG, I've been doing some hand-drawn passes for various reasons. It seems like my first week on a new job, I always get asked to do something that's hand-drawn, which is very interesting.
Wow. Yeah. So I would imagine that you strike me as somebody who's a very adventurous person and also one who is very curious about trying new things, definitely from a creative standpoint. We've actually had you, obviously, on a previous podcast episode when we were celebrating the life of Richard Williams.
Yes.
Is that one of the reasons why you moved from 2D to CG? And would you find that to be something that's important if you were to toggle back and forth from different styles or techniques?
Well, I mean, I think being really open-minded and game for anything, willing to learn, all those kinds of things are very important for having a long career. Anyone can have a long career, but an enjoyably long career.
Yeah.
And to still look forward to getting up and doing it every morning. You have to keep reinventing yourself and re-injecting new information and new ideas, I think. And I thrive, like you just nailed it. I love learning new things. So it's been the path that I guess I've chosen. And that one that I've kind of fallen into is to have had to learn new things constantly.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit. What got you into animation in general? How'd you get the bug?
I love that question because it's funny. Every time it comes up, it's everybody seems to have some sort of connection, like their mom or something. So in my case, I think it was definitely my mom. She brought me to an animation course when I was like 10, and we were doing, stop motion stuff under the camera, and I was absolutely mesmerized by it. And
was it just like a summer camp kind of thing, or?
Yeah, it was like they had a group for kids, like a summer camp kind of thing, and they just like pointed like 16 mil cameras at the ground, and you just use like plasticine or toothpicks or something to create animation, and then they'd show it to you next week. And I was completely mesmerized by it. I thought it was amazing.
Wow.
And
Is this in Vancouver?
my parents are both in media. My dad was a CBC guy for a long time. And so they used to do things like they'd bring home a reel-to-reel projector and they'd show us movies and like NFB shorts and stuff. I thought everybody's parents did this, but apparently not.
Yeah.
So I went another route and decided I was going to be a normal human. And then I realized, no, I really want to be an animator. And I went to Sheridan College.
Nice. So where you now you're from Vancouver? You're from British Columbia, is that right? Or
That's a complex question because I've lived in a lot of different cities, but I spent a long time in Vancouver. I grew up here partly. I've lived here a bunch of times. I think it's my 4th time living in Vancouver. But I spent most of my life in Toronto.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard Vancouver is amazing. I haven't been there since I was a real little kid, but I've heard amazing things about that town, especially nowadays. Yeah. So when you went to Sheridan, did you have the idea of maybe even just being a stop motion animator, or were you going?
That's a good question too, because I when I went to Sheridan College, it was sort of the late 80s, early 90s, and it was just pre-boom. So at the time, I got the impression that you didn't go into animation for the money. Like you didn't want to become a hugely successful Disney animator necessarily. It was like whatever your path was. And I was invited to be in this international summer school, which is a little different than the regular program. So it's like a compressed full-time program with people from all over the world. There was only about 25 of us or something, and they were all different backgrounds. So some people were definitely going down the Disney path, but that was not really my path. I wanted to work for the NFB or the CBC and make short films, hand-drawn, Frederick Back's Man Who Planted Trees, that kind of thing, or Richard Williams' Christmas Carol. That was definitely where my heart was at the time. Yeah. And CG animation didn't really exist then.
In Canada, it was definitely more supported too,
Yes.
That's my understanding is that, a lot of times the Canadian government, they would give grants to animators to produce films. And I think that's probably the case in England as well.
Oh, yes, for sure. And you've probably seen The Snowman, that TVC cartoon. I was in love with that one for a long time. I think Canada doesn't really even realize, but when you travel abroad, people know the NFB, National Film Board, and their work, and a lot of animators in the 90s anyway were pretty impressed. When you said you're from Canada, they would say, oh, the NFB. And we had film festivals every year. We would win tons of awards. And I don't know if it's as prestigious anymore, but back in the day, I mean, Canada was considered sort of the main animation hub.
Yeah, it's too bad that now, I mean, you can go back, and I find myself going down the rabbit hole in YouTube to try to look at all these different films that were created, essentially largely, like you were saying, mostly in the maybe late 70s, throughout the 80s, these incredibly beautiful films of varying styles that were produced out of that era.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's mind-blowing. I think it comes from that grant system being really healthy at the time. A lot of different kinds of artists and people like Wendy Tilby, who probably not very many people have heard of on this podcast, but she's an amazing illustrator and animator. And for me, my heroes were people like that. And Cordell Barker, who made The Cat Came Back, which is a hilarious.
Yes, that's one of the greatest films ever. Yeah. Yeah. So how was at the time when you started to get into Sheridan, how good were you getting into life drawing even before you got into college? Or did you dive heavy into that? Okay.
I did. Yeah. I studied at OCAD actually. After I graduated I went to York University and just did a BA. And after that, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I just took some courses at OCAD and I took some life drawing there. So I kind of built a portfolio without really realizing what I was going to use it for. I was just doing it out of interest. And I've always drawn. I was filling sketchbooks constantly, but I didn't really think of it as something I could make into a profession until later on.
Okay. Yeah. And once you got out of college, did you immediately start working for Richard Williams, or did you start doing some other things just a little bit before then? And how did you get in? Like, you gotta talk me through this.
That was crazy, actually.
You weren't even that familiar with him at the time, right?
No. I mean, I knew who he was because I love, like I said, the Christmas Carol was definitely something that I thought was amazing. And our family really likes the movie Raggedy Ann and Andy, which is like, people talk about that as kind of, with mixed reviews, but we just love the art style. So I knew who he was, but at Sheridan, they were asking people if anyone was interested in going to England to work on the last few years of this magnum opus, Thief and the Cobbler, which you covered in your podcast that I was on. And I was kind of like, oh, that sounds fun. Going to England, working with this big director, that sounds fun. So I put my a portfolio together with a bunch of other classmates, and they chose 3 of us. Myself and another couple of people went over with me. And so I was only in second year. So I didn't really know what I was getting involved in. And of course, a lot of people really realized how prestigious he was. He had won an Oscar for Who Framed Roger Rabbit at that point. And I had seen it, and I was thinking, oh, that's pretty incredible. So that might be a good career move.
So did you finish school?
I did. I went back a few years later in 1993, and I went and I got my diploma from Sheridan College.
Okay. So so obviously we know that didn't pan out as well as anybody had hoped, but
The Thief, no. That went a little bit sideways.
Yeah. But I'm sure it was just like a tremendous experience for you, and obviously probably was a major component, obviously aside from your talent, but a major component to getting you all these next step gigs, I would assume, right?
Well, it also, when you go to a place like that, you meet people from everywhere and people with all these different backgrounds. And I mean, it was a real education. We were thrown right into the deep end. I mean, I walked in from, I wasn't very good planning on my part, but I was like a kid, right? I booked a flight that landed I was in a red eye from Canada, landed on Monday morning, walked into the studio at 9 a.m. straight from Heathrow.
Oh my God.
With my suitcase and my guitar, and they handed me a scene folder and a pencil. And I did like a full day's work.
Oh
hey, don't do that, kids. Book your flights a little earlier. And
right.
So I worked a solid year there, and it was, it was intense, like we talked about last time. But man, you learn so much. And I worked for some fantastic animators. And I started there as an in-betweener, and then did a lot of assisting work where they leave a lot of things to do. So I learned animation basically from some of the best animators in the world.
So that's really curious. I mean, and especially like, I could see perhaps why you might want to go back and get your diploma after, particularly in the 90s. But like nowadays, you have so many people that are like, if I have a chance to do something that's very similar to that, I'm going to get so much training. And some people, they don't even consider going to an actual college as being, man.
I mean, nowadays, if you can get a mentor, you can learn so much. I've always really believed in that alternative education route. And even though I've been a teacher for a long time, and I definitely believe I have a degree. I went to university. My kid goes to university. I believe in higher education, but it isn't for everyone. And I think some people really need that hands-on input.
Yeah.
You learn so fast on the job.
What was it that made you feel like you needed to go back after you've been working with these masters? I mean,
I know that's a fun question because I didn't go directly back. I remember having to make the decision because the enrollment date was coming, and I had to decide to quit my job at Richard Williams, go back to Sheridan with my class, and finish in the same amount of time as I would have without going. And then I decided to stay, and it was such a heart-wrenching decision. I still remember making it, and I decided, okay, this is a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I should stay. But watching my class move on and graduate with their films and everything. Remember, I was originally there because I wanted to become a filmmaker. So it was kind of saying goodbye to that dream. And then from Richard Williams, I was able to get a job at Russell Hall, and I stayed in the UK. And then I went to Berlin, and I worked on an Asterix movie there. And it did seem like maybe I should just put the Sheridan thing to rest. I didn't really need to go back. But then I decided, no, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And so I went back, and I thought it was a good idea to finish my diploma, just to have the piece of paper. So I went back with a completely different group of people, which was wonderful because then you just expand your network. You meet even more.
Plus you have bragging rights at that point. You can tell people that you've been working with all these badasses. That you can...
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely went back with more information, and I knew better how to make my film and stuff, which it didn't really actually pan out, but it was still a learning experience. And even if you don't finish something, just working on a project, being really dedicated to it, it really is a good thing to do.
Yeah. So I know towards the latter part of the 90s, you also did teaching, right? But you were still in the industry as a working animator. What was the transition into, what sparked the transition into diving more into computer animation?
Okay, I'll try to make this as brief as I can. So we were in Vancouver, and I got to work for Marv Newland, who was also a huge hero of mine. is. He's an international rocket ship founder. They made a little film called Bambi Meets Godzilla that you might have seen.
No,
anyways,
I've never
very funny.
seen that.
Oh, you should check it out. It's on YouTube. So I had really been a huge fan of his work, and he was making a bunch of shorts for Gary Larson. Okay. So they were doing the Gary Larson Far Side. So I was in heaven. I was just, this was my dream. I got to work for one of my heroes and doing hand-drawn stuff. And, I had still been chipping away at my film. At the time, in the 90s, we were making pretty good money. So I was doing some CD-ROM work and some teaching and working freelance. So I got to have it all. It was kind of like my mid-retirement where I could work part-time and go to the beach during the day and make pretty good money and work on my film. I mean, it sounds idyllic, right?
Yeah.
It was pretty nice. And at the time, sort of for most people were going to Disney, Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, and making pots of money and working on these great big films. And I was kind of looking at that from afar going, I don't think that's my dream, but wow, that sounds exciting. And then we decided, go ahead.
But you were also, I'm assuming you were maybe feeling the effects of that, like in sort of a ripple effect in terms of, now animators are starting to get paid for the quality of work, right? So you were feeling that as well, even though you weren't a part of the DreamWorks, Disney mania. Is that true? Or
yeah, it's so true. And it's funny because I didn't get into animation for the money or for to work on great big features, because that pathway wasn't super clear at the time. The golden age that we are in now or the golden age of hand-drawn animation in the 90s, nobody knew that was coming, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I was still very dedicated to my ideal of just living a simple life and being a bit of a hippie, working, teaching and making films. But I couldn't help but notice that other people were having these huge successes. And I thought, should I have a bigger career? Should I try harder? Anyway, then I had a baby, and that changes everything. So I wanted to be very hands-on with him and be very involved in his life. So I wanted to be home more. And so I pushed my career more towards teaching at the time because it was much more flexible and very lucrative and lots of fun. So teaching, parenting, and freelancing kept me pretty busy for the next few years. But when it was time for me to really double down and go back to work full time, the industry had already peaked and troughed. And it was so fast, that turnaround from mid-90s to about 2000. There was no hand-drawn animation work, very, very little. So, I mean, some people definitely kept going in 2D and have really succeeded, but it was a really tough time for anybody who was a hand-drawn artist.
Yeah. How did you feel? What was the conversation temperature with 2D animators at that time? Was everybody pretty much in a panic? I mean, because I know that there were a lot of people that, obviously there were a lot of incredibly talented hand-drawn animators who were getting let go. Many of them were making the attempts to get into CG animation. They were, I think, some of the bigger studios were definitely trying to train them to move into that realm. What was the temperature like in terms of conversations with people?
That's a great way to put that, the temperature, because I mean, it was bittersweet, right? A lot of people who decided they were going to double down and stick with hand-drawn animation. I don't think anyone thought it was going to completely disappear. I think everybody thought it would just kind of go through a little bit of a valley, and then it would kind of come back, because obviously we had seen some of these most beautiful movies ever made just finished, like The Lion King. We thought, well, it's not going to disappear, right? So people really reinvested. People were talking about people in their 30s and 40s. So they were like, okay, well, I'm at the peak of my career, and they just doubled down and they stayed in hand-drawn animation. Meanwhile, people, like you said, who were lucky enough to work at places like Disney, DreamWorks, got training. And the way it was described to me by a man who made a successful transition was they told them, we will train you. Some of you will make it and some of you will not. And he was one of the lucky ones, so he survived. But some people just can't make that mental transition. I mean, when you're used to holding a pencil and flipping paper, I mean, when I was that age and when I was at that stage of my career, I didn't even have a computer. I didn't even use email. So facing down this idea that I was going to have to, transition to computer animation, I was very worried about it. And the temperature, as you referred to it, was somewhat, there was a bit of conflict. People had this idea that CG wasn't as good There was a bit of people looking down their nose at it because it was in its rudimentary stages. Like Toy Story, if you look at it now, doesn't look like, it did to us then. It was pretty clunky, and the character animation wasn't where it is now. So hand-drawn animators were a little bit snobby about it, but at the same time, we could all see the writing on the wall. We all had to adapt or die.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was working at a really lovely little place called Centennial College, which used to have a kick-ass CG animation program. And so I was teaching there. So I was teaching theory. So my thing was, I don't even use the computers. So we had other people teaching Maya and teaching Softimage, and they learned a whole bunch of different softwares at the time. And I was just very much like one of those snobby 2D animators. I'm like, I just draw. I don't use computers. So I would draw on the board.
Yeah, so when it comes to like theory and stuff, does that mean just like basic animation principles, acting, and that type of thing, or?
Yeah, that's right. So I would, and also a little bit of animation history. So I would always try to show examples from important films and important filmmakers and animators. And I knew I was training them for the industry, so I was trying to show like relevant stuff for them. So I would help, I would show them examples from, game cutscenes and things like that I thought they would like, and big feature blockbusters, VFX and all that. But I was teaching the 12 principles of animation, and I had come from Richard Williams, so I was using, he hadn't written a survival kit then, so I was using Disney's Illusion of Life, and just trying to encourage them to dig into the history and to understand where animation came from. And so I was sitting in this computer lab teaching many hours a week and raising this little guy, and all of a sudden it became really obvious to me when he was ready to go to school, I had to go to work full time, and I had to learn computer animation in a hot second. So I think I had like 2 months to get production ready. So it was pretty interesting, because what I would do is I would assign these assignments and explain, all the principles involved, and then I would sit down at a spare computer in the same lab and try to do the assignment. And so I had to get some of these students to help me out, show me how to use Maya a little bit. And it was really fun, because like they really hammed it up. Like the tables were turned, like they were giving me pointers and stuff. So it was really lovely.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I managed to create one performance piece, and it was just like a straight ahead piece of kind of dance animation. And I took that to George Elliott Animation in Toronto, and he hired me. So he took a chance that I was going to be able to hack it on a show called Backyardigans. Which was singing and dancing, multiple character shots. And I started on that show with very, very little idea what I was actually doing. So
yeah. Were you enjoying it? I mean, while you were working through it, did you find yourself going, oh, this is actually kind of fun?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I struggled with the interface. Like the actual tool seemed very clunky to me. I couldn't understand. Like it definitely wasn't invented by an animator, using those products at the time. It was just not animation friendly. And I really did have to work hard to adapt my skills, but I always knew what I wanted to see in the screen. So when I'd see the storyboard panel or whatever, and I would watch the video reference, and I knew exactly what I had to get. But being able to get to that point was just a struggle. I brought my work home every night. I worked on weekends. I worked a lot of long hours. It was really challenging. And I look back on the kind of stuff that I did back then, and I just, it's amazing how much you learn.
That's
in
how
the
it
first
is
couple
for
years.
everybody, though. Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was, for a hot minute, I was definitely passionate and hoping to become a traditional animator, and I was being mentored by a Disney animator from across the country, and he was like always telling me, just like, draw everything you see, draw every day as much as humanly possible. Go back to your first page once you're done with that sketchbook, and you're going to see how much you've improved. And don't look at that as a negative. See it as a positive, That's
a wonderful thing to tell people. And I really do think that's an important thing. Don't destroy your old work. Keep it in a folder and look at it from time to time. Look at it 5 years from now, and you will be amazed how much you've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. So you moved pretty heavily into CG animation pretty shortly thereafter. I mean, it seems like, obviously now you're working on some of the most expensive blockbuster movies around, essentially. What was the transition like from just starting out so small to now getting to the point of actually working on these big blockbuster films? And do you find that you've lost your sense of the hippie aspect of you because those films are so demanding? How was that transition, and how do you deal with that mentally and physically from a work standpoint?
Right. Well, that's an interesting way to put it too, because I mean, all these things that I did led me to this moment where, my son grew up, everybody says this, it seemed like a blink of an eye. And my husband is an animator as well. He got a job at Animal Logic Vancouver. And when my son was ready to go to college, my husband was like, it looks like we need to move to Vancouver. And I put my reel out there, and I got a job at Scanline VFX in Vancouver, and it was working on the Justice League movie. And I have to say, like, when I was in my interview, I was like, wow, you guys are, they wanted to hire me. And I thought, am I going to make this transition? Like, this is a very different style than I'm working. And they said, oh yeah, you can totally handle this. You know the principles of animation, and it shows on your reel, and this is the same kind of thing. It's just a different style. So again, it was like a leap of faith, I think, that I could adapt to the style. And I totally loved it. It was actually kind of a surprise to me. I thought I was ready to work on something different. So I've done a lot of kids TV and a lot of, beautiful or comedic hand-drawn stuff. And my style has been sort of in that realm. And then there's another side of my personality where I've always really loved big monster movies. And my son and I used to watch all the old Godzillas and King Kong. And that's always been dear to my heart as well. Yeah. But I never really thought about going into VFX as a career until kind of later in my career, about 15 years, 20 years in. I saw a lot of people go to work on VFX projects, and I thought, that sounds like fun. And again, like going back to what we were talking about earlier, reinventing yourself and trying new things is so important to me to stay excited about what I'm doing. I moved to Vancouver and I started working on Justice League, which was all, doing all kinds of like body mechanics stuff. And people refer to it as doing digital doubles, but it kind of sounds like a pejorative term. Digital double doesn't sound very exciting. But what we end up doing is stuff that can't be mocapped. It can't be done in live action. It's too dangerous or it's impossible. It defies the laws of physics. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you start with a blank set, and you have the characters just standing there, and you've got to invent their action from scratch. And, yes, there is some mocap involved occasionally, but a lot of the shots I got, there was no you couldn't even shoot reference. It was like people running sideways on a building. Yeah. It's like you could never act out. So I got to animate Wonder Woman, and who's a major hero of mine, and Superman and Aquaman. Anyway, for me, it was just a ball. I had so much fun. And then I got to work on Aquaman after that, and that was just wonderful.
Which was an incredible movie. Yeah. That's probably my favorite DC movie so far, outside of Joker.
It was a gas. And I got to work on that shark movie, The Meg. That was fun. I just literally every day I'd go to work and come home, and my husband would be like, how was your day? And I'd say, it was awesome. Just had so much fun.
You have to be really careful when you're artists, as we are. We are hunched over desks. We are constantly dealing with deadlines. We are constantly dealing with stress. I mean, when you're moving into doing these big blockbuster films, there is so much intense pressure, and that's why you see, like, at the end credits of these movies, it's just massive armies of artists who are just like doubling down, just trying to get this stuff finished on time. How is it for the artist in terms of the pressure that they put on themselves, and how do you work through that so you don't? Because obviously you're very interested in health. For those that don't know, you're a power lifter. You love being out in nature. You love hiking. You love exercise. So it's a very important part of your, I guess, personality and DNA. But for those that aren't like that, how does one work through having that balance?
That's such an awesome topic, and I love thinking about this. I mean, I think what's been interesting for me is because I kind of parachuted into the VFX world mid-career. I'm not young. I've been in it for 25 years. So I found myself working with people who had just done that one thing. So they started in VFX, been in VFX for 10, 15, 20 years. And, obviously it's different when you've put so many days behind you. the pressure is extremely intense in VFX, and the hours can be really long. I was lucky to land at Scanline where we didn't actually do a lot of overtime. I mean, some projects they do, but we didn't. But I know some people at some other companies were doing 100-hour weeks, and even on the same show. And the mental and physical pressure is real. And I've seen a lot of stuff. And how can I start this topic? It's very important that you take care of your health, your physical and your mental health, if you're going to have the ability to withstand the pressure of this job, both physically and mentally. We're not built to sit at a desk, hunched over. Like I always think about those the cartoons of there's a shrimp that's like, what's that called? The mantis shrimp. That's like, that's what I see when I see people hunched over their desks. And when we get into focus and concentration, our heads go forwards. We're like zooming in with our faces. And people really hurt themselves just sitting in one position. Now we have standing desks. A lot of companies, like I'm at Method now, we have adjustable standing desks. So you can change your position during the day. But standing all day is not a better alternative to sitting all day. If you're asking, your body is built to work. It's built to climb mountains. It's built to haul water. If you're going to take all of those physical attributes of your body away and just become like a brain, carried around in your body, and you're just basically staring straight ahead into a lighted box, your body's going to rebel. It won't take long. 10 years, you'll have neck pain, back pain, and I also think we're social beings, and we're meant to share ideas, and we're meant to keep learning and having new inputs. So if all you are is an output machine and you're working 100 hours a week just cranking out shots, I just don't think that's sustainable for most people.
So do you find yourself, getting up off of your desk for every hour and a half, or do you just try to stay fit outside of the time that you're in the studio? What are some techniques that people can take away?
Varying your position, to be really honest. I think even just moving around, fidgeting, changing, paying attention to your ergonomics. A lot of companies have an ergonomic specialist. None of the ones that I've worked at did, but some people take advantage of those things. You should have your feet flat on either the floor or on a raised box. I'm too short to sit on my chair and use my computer without something under my feet. Getting something in your lower lumbar spine. So either something rolled up, or you can get these little round cushions. That's all I have. It just keeps your spine in that neutral position so that you're not rounding your lower back. And the other thing too is shoulders down and back, using your lats to keep your shoulders down so they don't roll forward. You end up with rotator cuff problems, the backs of your shoulders. There was one day where I was in the studio and I was like, oh, my traps are so sore. And everybody did the same gesture, left arm across, going, ow, my shoulder. And it's like, what, we all have a broken shoulder. Just from sitting in a mouse position. I went to a physiotherapist one time and I walked in the room and she said, so you're right-handed?
Yeah, right.
And I was like, you can tell just by looking at me that I'm rotated all the way around, even though I know about it and I'm trying not to do that. So your body will bonsai itself into whatever shape you stay in the most. So yes, moving, getting your ergonomics settled straight, and looking up some information on the internet about good desktop ergonomics is smart. I would also highly recommend this guy Kelly Starrett. He's written a couple books called The Supple Leopard and Desk Bound, and it's all about maintaining your physical health as a desk worker. So some adaptations you can do to try to get your monitor up to the right height, and I think taking care of things like your eye health is really important. I've only just started doing this, but looking away, look as far away as you can. About, I think they say for just 20 seconds, every 20 minutes or so. We don't often have windows we can look out, but if you can, just look really far away, move your neck, roll your shoulders, stretch your hands, those kinds of things. We all kind of know this, but just getting the time to do it. And I think if you only do workouts at a gym, most people only work out, if they do, about 2 hours to 4 hours a week. That's not enough to combat, 40 to 60 to 80 hours of sitting in the same position. So it's important to build those little movement things into your day, either in your breaks at lunchtime. I
have a feeling that that's probably just going to be a natural progression of maybe even how studios tend to assist workers, employees who obviously are just working tremendous hours they'll probably start implementing that into daily practice. Like, even in, like for example, in China, they have the Tai Chi that's done. We don't do that at all here. You know?
If we could adopt that practice, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I think I did something when I was at Scanline. I got a yoga teacher certificate. And so I brought that to the studio, and I used to teach these classes at lunchtime and in the mornings. And there was quite a lot of interest. There were more than 30 people signed up. So it was too many to fit in one room. So we had to have multiple groups, which shows the need for that sort of thing. And what we were doing was some balance, some flexibility, mobility, a little bit of strength, but mostly it's for relaxation. And that brings up the other part of your health, which is your mental health. And it's kind of my little crusade right now, because I've noticed a lot of people in the last few years, partly as I transitioned into more leadership roles where people come to you with things. A lot of people are having a really hard time. Just, they're feeling anxious, they're feeling stressed, and it is costing employers. It is, people are losing time for work. They're actually too sick to come to work because they're super stressed out, suffering from depression, addiction, all sorts of stuff. It's more common than you think.
People are
hiding it.
If you look at the industry too, it's not only the pressure of maintaining your production amount that they've asked you to do, right? There's also the competitive nature of it, right?
Yeah,
you want
that's
to
a
make
good
sure
point.
that you're staying ahead, that you're staying in the eye of the other leaders that are seeing how well you're doing, to make sure that you're staying for the next production. And they also see that, production companies are closing down all the time. So it's this constant feeling of, I might get laid off as soon as this is done. I need to really make sure that I'm either staying ahead of the class, or what am I going to do when this is all done, right?
Well, a lot of people are working on their exit strategy, right? You hear that a lot. But, spending your days at work surviving, putting up with things, just putting one day in front of the other and dreaming of this future plan where you're going to escape, I just don't think that's healthy. I think it's great to have an exit strategy, don't get me wrong. But if you're not enjoying your work anymore, if you're coming to work because you have to, and it's lost its luster, and whatever reason you got into animation in the first place, your heart is broken and you don't really want to do it anymore. That's why you don't see a lot of older workers. Like, people get discouraged, disheartened. They lose their focus, they lose their drive, and they get replaced. They age out and they become too expensive. I think if you meet a bunch of younger workers who come into it guns blaring, they are so excited. They'll do whatever they have to do. They'll stay up all night. We were there in their 20s and 30s. They're super excited about what they're doing. If you were an employer, wouldn't you want people with that kind of energy and drive? Definitely more experienced workers bring something else to the table, like their wisdom, even if they work more slowly, I've heard kind of in general we do. You've done those same kinds of motions. You've animated them many, many times before. So you don't have to go through as many iterations. They have clearer ideas. They're more steady. They're a little bit less reactive, not prone to like the ups and downs. I think it's a shame that more companies don't invest in the long-term health of their workers and try to build a long-term workforce. It's definitely got a disposable component. And
definitely. I think,
you mentioned, like, you see the writing on the wall. Studios close, your friends get laid off. I've seen many companies go bankrupt, including the first one that I worked at. I think a lot of our friends, we used to work at ARC Productions in Toronto, and about 500 people suddenly lost their jobs. They just came to work and there was a chain on the door. My friends worked at MPC where I worked last year. It is really hard not to think, am I next?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we disposable? Are we just going to be turfed out one day? That's very stressful. And taking care of your mental health, just to be really specific, I think you don't have to follow a formal meditation practice, but it certainly benefited me. I studied mindfulness and took a course, and be a hypocrite if I said I did it every day, but I definitely have put a lot of time and energy into caring for my mental health, trying to get outside as much as I can. And when things get really, really stressful, I definitely feel the effects of it. Just trying to take care of yourself, breathing, acknowledging that it is a stressful job, it is a stressful time. And I think reaching out to your friends, making sure that people know that you're not feeling too great, this is really important,
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the, it seems like a common thread with creatives in general that in these conversations that I've had on the podcast is that, there's the stress aspect, there's the, and what all trickles down, like what all of the, what's the root cause of the stress, right? And most of the time it's because of the demands of the profession. It's the expectation that others put on you. It's also your
Mm-hmm.
own personal expectations as you as an artist, wanting to stay above the fray. There's just so many different ways to be stressed out. One of the conversations I've had over the past year was with Will Finn, the great animator from Disney and many other studios, of course. But he has a great blog. I cannot remember what the name of it is, but it's something to the effect of I do not want a job in animation. And it was sort of like this big hit, caption. But really what he was saying is that you need to think of it more on the long term of I want a career in animation, and that
That's right.
this is a lifelong experience for me. And then seeing it more as like a long view perspective is actually better for you, rather than just seeing the drama and the stress that you have right in front of yourself. And then what that does is that it gives you I guess just more perspective of like, okay, I know that this career is potentially volatile in terms of, jobs coming and going often. And if I can be at peace with that and find the balance of life and life and work balance, that, it would actually be a very positive career. Maybe that's kind of the balance that needs to be struck there, is to find a way to see it as like, I'm in this for the long haul. How can I be at peace with the stress by having that work-life balance type thing?
Yeah, that's well said, because if you do take that broad view, like that big overview of your life, it's really hard to do, especially when you're, nose to the grindstone, working 10, 12 hours a day in a very high stress environment. Some studios can be very, very intense. It behooves you to learn how to look at the long view, the big picture, and think this is just 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day. It's not my whole life. And then if you are in a situation where the stress doesn't alleviate itself in a short order, it's really important to keep looking, because some studios are great at managing artist stress, and they're very easy to work at. It's a positive environment. It's hard because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. You're working at your one little monitor in your workstation, and some environments are quite hard for artists to survive. The other thing is to understand that the stress isn't the same for everyone. So some people might thrive in an environment that would crush somebody else. Not everybody will tell the same story about the same studio, right? So you can say, oh, how was it working at, Studio X? And half the people you talk to will be like, that was the worst place I ever worked. And the other half will be like, it's the best place I ever worked. So it is very personal how you respond to stress. Only half of it's coming from outside. The rest is coming from within, and the pressure you put on yourself and how you process the information. And you've got to be a little bit more like honey badger about it. It's like, oh, well, that guy's mad at me, but, I still got to get this shot done. And, you've got to be able to pull yourself away from that emotional response. And it's hard, but you have to be a little bit more zen, like you said, and think, okay, this is just one moment, one bad day or whatever.
Right.
In your long career, if you looked at the graph, of the ups and downs, it's going to be, pretty smooth. We have a pretty easy life. Animation seems hard sometimes, but if you look at it from another perspective, I know a lot of people who left the industry to go do something else and came back.
Yeah, really?
Well, it's totally scary out there. They leave to become, something else. They thought it was a horrible job, and they wanted to leave and do something. And they realized they missed the craft. And they also found that a lot of people out there work really, really hard and much worse conditions than we have. We are very fortunate. And I speak for myself, like in VFX, there's a lot of downsides, but, we're well paid. The environment is usually really convivial, and we have a lot of fun. Studios do a lot to try to make it positive. What you bring to the table affects your enjoyment of the job a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I'm sure that studios realize your value as a leader too, because you're not only bringing to the table, many years of incredible work, but also your mindset personally, and having people come to you is probably a big value, and hopefully that's going to be the case for a lot of different studios too. I'm sure that'd be the case. Yeah. But I see that we're really closing up on our time here, unfortunately. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what's next for you and where they can see some of your work?
Well, right now I just started a new job. I'm at Method, and I'm working on a really cute movie. It's going to be on Netflix this Halloween. That's all I can say about it. And working with some people that I've worked with before, it's a lot of fun. And I will tell you more about that when I can. But the last thing I worked on was I just finished a big stint on King Kong versus Godzilla. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that. It was supposed to come out in March. Now it's coming out in November, so we'll have to wait a little longer. But so I animated. I got some great shots on that, doing big monster shots, which is really, really fun.
How full circle is that, by the way?
Yes, I know. I was like, I can't believe it. I had King Kong and Godzilla in my shots, and it was just so much fun. Those are great characters to work with.
Yeah, but if I could just ask one more question, I'm curious as to your thoughts on the hand-drawn animation industry right now, particularly as movies like Claws are coming into the foray.
Okay, so I was so excited to see Claws. It's really nice to see hand-drawn animation. It was very well received too. I mean, it was seen how many million times?
30, I think I saw.
Yeah, 30 million times. I always felt that it was such a waste for the hand-drawn animation scene to shrink so much, and we've lost so many good people. So much talent was wasted. People just left the industry completely with all their talents and didn't make it back in. And I feel really sad about that loss of continuity in our industry. But now there's so much hand-drawn animation. People think it's smaller than it is. It's happening in Asia, it's happening in Europe, and I think there really is quite a lot of hand-drawn animation going on right now that's looking better than ever.
Yeah, well,
I actually think it looks better than the 90s.
Nice. Well, hopefully we will see some of your work circling back to that industry as well. So that would be really cool.
That would be fun. Wouldn't that be funny to end my career back in
Yeah, I would love to see that. Yeah. Well, listen, Tara, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're super busy, and I really appreciate you coming back to us, and hopefully we'll have you back again.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
All right. You have a great day.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.